The balloons were blue and white. Someone from HR had arranged them in a loose arc over the conference room screen, like a birthday party for a child they didn't know. There was a cake, too, sheet style, overfrosted with "Thank you, Daniel," piped across the middle in icing that was already beginning to sweat under the lights. A half-dozen co-workers stood awkwardly near the food table, clapping without conviction. One snapped a photo. No one asked if I wanted one. I stood beside Gavin Lynn, who had been sitting in on my meetings for the past 3 weeks under the vague title of Systems Strategy Associate. He smiled like someone about to inherit a beach house. I smiled like someone about to watch it flood. Julia Markham, the VP of Operations, cleared her throat. "We just want to say how deeply grateful we are for everything you've done over the years, Daniel. 26 years is incredible. Truly." She turned to the others in the room, as if prompting a second round of applause. This time, no one raised their phones. Someone coughed. "We know transitions can be difficult," she went on. "But this digital transformation is an exciting step, and we're thrilled that you've agreed to stay on through the next month to help Gavin on board." I nodded once. Not in agreement, just to end the sentence. There had been no choice. The phrase they'd used in the original meeting was early retirement with incentive alignment. The implication, take the package or watch them eliminate the role outright. My severance would vanish. My reputation wouldn't. I took the package, but I took other things with me, too. The room smelled like sheet cake and overbrewed coffee. The projector showed a collage of photos HR had pulled from old archives. Most were stock team-building shots. None had my name in the metadata. At the edge of one photo, you could just barely see my shoulder. That felt about right. Gavin leaned over. "I'm going to miss our syncs," he said. "You've been incredibly helpful." His tone was polished, just enough sincerity to sound like he meant it, not enough to convince anyone who'd been in the building more than a year. "You'll be fine," I said. He looked relieved, like he'd passed a test he didn't know he was taking. He didn't realize I'd built the interface he now relied on. He didn't know I'd written the scripts, still auto-logging his error reports. He'd never seen the real system, only the GUI I wrapped around it so it wouldn't scare people like him. Julia called for a group photo. I stood in the middle. Someone placed the cake knife in my hand like I was about to cut a ribbon. When it was over, I left with a paper plate I didn't want and a printout of next steps in a company envelope. Back at my desk, a man I didn't recognize was already measuring the space with his eyes. "Just grabbing some books," I said. He nodded, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. I took exactly one thing from that office, a small external SSD in the back of the second drawer. It wasn't company property. It had never touched the internal network. It contained 17 years of scripts, most deprecated, many undocumented, a few still active, none ever truly understood by the ones who'd hired my replacement. As I left the building, I passed the new glass mural that stretched across the lobby wall. It featured buzzwords etched in frosted typography: innovation, momentum, future first. I paused for a moment beneath the word agility. It had been Julia's favorite during the last all hands. I took out my phone, snapped a photo. No caption. I didn't post it anywhere. Not yet. At home, I opened the SSD. The folders hadn't changed, but I had. They'd said I was too slow, too cautious, too rooted in legacy thinking, that I couldn't keep up with cloud-first workflows and hyper-automation. They were half right. I didn't keep up. I moved ahead, quietly. So while they celebrated my exit with frosted slogans and recycled speeches, I began mapping something faster than they deserved. Not revenge, not spite, just precision. Let them automate me. I'd return the favor. When I joined Ravel Dynamics, it was called KLM Consulting, a name chosen because the founders couldn't agree on anything better. That was 1997. The office was a converted storage floor above a coffee distributor. You could smell roasted beans in the wiring. They hired me as a systems analyst. Back then, that meant you knew how to spell SQL without Googling it. I wasn't brilliant. I was methodical, precise. I didn't talk much in meetings, but I asked the questions that made people stop pretending they had answers. I was 29 when I walked in. I was 57 when they walked me out. In between, I built the plumbing no one ever saw. It started small, scripting batch processes so the finance team didn't need to manually re-enter invoices across 4 systems. Then I built the firm's first internal dashboard, pulling data from 5 departments into a single view. That dashboard saved us $180,000 in compliance penalties the first year. No one remembered that part. They just remembered the old UI and how I never changed it. For 26 years, I watched the company grow from 15 employees to nearly 400. I documented everything: the code base, the workflows, the flaws. I patched systems other people built badly and made them look stable. When someone else's project launched and worked, I was the reason it didn't crash. Quiet fixes, undocumented patches, always invisible. That was fine with me. I didn't need a spotlight, I needed clarity. But clarity wasn't what the company rewarded anymore. It changed around year 20. We rebranded, hired a new CTO from a SaaS unicorn. He wore designer sneakers to all hands and used phrases like velocity windows and architectural churn. He saw the old infrastructure as a liability, despite the fact that it had 99.98% uptime over the last decade. He called it legacy spaghetti. He never once logged into the shell. Then came Gavin Lynn, hired straight out of a high-burn fintech startup. Age 29, degree in data science, fluent in Python, R, and performance metrics that looked good on slides. On paper, he was a systems analyst. In practice, he was a replacement. I was told Gavin would be shadowing me for knowledge transfer. The phrasing wasn't subtle. He came with energy. Good energy, I'll admit. Confident. Casual. When I showed him the backbone logic behind our main automation suite, about 14,000 lines of staggered shell scripts, he blinked like he had seen a dead language. "This stuff still runs?" I nodded, flawlessly. For 15 years he laughed. "I can't believe we're not on serverless containers yet." "We're not down either," I said. He didn't get it. For the next month, he asked surface-level questions, took screenshots, annotated dashboards. He wasn't curious. He was casing the building. 1 week before I was invited to retire, I saw my own folder open on his screen. A script I wrote for cross-system alert propagation had been renamed. No author attribution, no change notes, just new comments in his voice. He had started presenting it as refactored legacy logic. It wasn't refactored, it was repackaged. Still, I said nothing, because in that moment I saw something Gavin didn't. I saw how fragile it all was. He thought because he didn't understand it, it must be outdated. He didn't realize that code doesn't age. It either works or it doesn't. And mine worked. That night I backed up every tool I'd ever built, not the company files, my frameworks, my notes, my simulations. I'd been keeping them clean, organized, isolated for years, just in case. This wasn't spite, it was contingency. Because somewhere deep in the server logs of Ravel Dynamics, There's a quote I once buried in the comments of a script that still runs nightly. If you can't see the architect, check the foundation. I didn't need them to credit me, but I was never going to let them bury me under the very thing I built. It began with a login failure, just a simple red error bar that read, "Access denied. Contact your administrator." At first, I assumed it was a routine permissions change, maybe a mistake during one of Gavin's reorg pushes. But then I noticed it wasn't just one system. It was 3, and each failure pointed to a different admin credential. Credentials I had created, credentials that no longer recognized me. I checked the audit logs. Access had been rerouted through a new group, Sys Core Ops Beta, a group I had never seen before. I submitted a ticket to IT. The response was auto-generated. Access changes are part of company-wide platform transition. Please consult your line manager for approval. I didn't bother, because I knew exactly who had approved it. The next day, I opened our centralized scheduling tool to monitor the overnight tasks, the ones I had kept running for years without a single missed window. I found them renamed, retagged, my notes stripped out. In place of my original labeling conventions were sanitized descriptors like Gavin Refresh 01 and Gavin Runbook Priority. It wasn't even good naming, but it was loud. It was branded, and it worked just well enough to keep middle management impressed. I didn't complain. I didn't file anything. I archived the logs, quietly. 1 week later, I noticed something worse. A script I had written to synchronize user permission sets, automatically removing stale accounts and orphaned credentials, was disabled. I asked a junior analyst why. Gavin said we're moving to something cloud-native. Auto-cleaning feels legacy. So what's replacing it? Nothing yet. It's in progress. That was the phrase they used whenever they meant ignored. Within days, I saw dormant accounts begin to stack up, dozens of them. No cleanup, no access logs, just risk. Gavin hadn't replaced the system. He'd removed it because it made him look less essential, and no one noticed. Not the CTO, not the auditors, not HR, because the people who understood how the system truly functioned were either gone or being handed cake and balloons. Then came the internal memo. It landed in my inbox 2 weeks before my official exit date. A departmental announcement titled Streamlining Operational Logic for Modern Scalability. It was pure jargon, but buried in paragraph 4 was the real payload. All legacy code will be sunset by Q3 in alignment with the Core Ops Beta roadmap, led by Gavin Lin. I read that line 3 times. Sunset. It was a clean word, a pretty word, a word that turned an execution into a ceremony. They were burning down the infrastructure and letting the intern light the match. I didn't react, not outwardly, but I did start documenting things more aggressively. I built a private dashboard that monitored the scripts Gavin was replacing. I watched his Jenkins pipelines fail 3 times on Thursday nights. I saw the load spikes he didn't know how to mitigate. I captured screenshots of ticket escalations tied directly to systems I used to stabilize with 40 lines of bash logic. He was building new tools on top of foundations he didn't understand. Worse, he was disabling the safety rails as he went. And every time something broke, he added a new layer of abstraction. No one traced it back to the root, because no one could see it anymore. One afternoon, I overheard him in the break room talking to another analyst. "They don't get it," he said. "People like Daniel, they're not adaptable. They hoard knowledge like it's power. I'm building transparency, real agility. I stood just out of view, coffee in hand. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't, because that's when I understood the full picture. He wasn't just erasing my code. He was erasing my methodology, the very architecture that let the company operate without crashing. He thought speed was the same as competence. He thought wrappers and dashboards made things modern. He thought I had been a bottleneck. He didn't realize I had been the pressure valve. I went home that night and pulled up my private project folder. It wasn't labeled Revenge. It wasn't even labeled Revel. It was called Threadline, a reference to the invisible paths inside complex cloth that determine where it stretches and where it tears. I opened the first script. I didn't want a courtroom. I wanted consequence. The first thing I did was sketch the skeleton. Not code, just logic, dependencies, decision trees, trigger points. I printed them out on paper and mapped them across my kitchen wall like a crime scene. Threadline wouldn't just replicate the systems I built at Revel. It would surpass them, modular, agnostic, and fully automated from day one. No user interface, no branding, no bloat, just automation at its cleanest form, brutally efficient and invisible. I coded at night, 8 to 10 hours at a time. I didn't log in from any machine tied to my name. I used a fresh Ubuntu environment and cloud access routed through a clean LLC Keenware Solutions, registered in Nevada. No digital fingerprints leading back to Revel or to me. Each function in Threadline was based on real-world fragility I had personally witnessed. Gavin's unstable pipelines, his misconfigured alert triggers, the half-deployed patches he left hanging for weeks. I didn't need to sabotage him. I just needed to mirror his failure without the failure. That was the core of Threadline, a machine that made human error irrelevant. Meanwhile, I watched Revel buckle. Their bug tickets spiked by 38% in Q2. Audit errors rose. I noticed a new round of incident reports every Friday morning, right after Gavin's automated jobs were scheduled to run. The new infrastructure wasn't just flawed, it was hollow, but management didn't notice. Not yet, because they were chasing KPIs that looked modern. Gavin gave them dashboards that blinked. Words like cloud native and serverless and AI-augmented insight delivery filled the slide decks. No one asked where the real logic came from. I finished the first full version of Threadline 6 weeks after my exit. It ran 124 individual modules. Task orchestration with rollback safety, credential sweeps and expiry alerts, cross-system anomaly detection, self-healing retry chains, predictive data cleanup based on usage decay, all written in minimal code, all triggerless, fully autonomous unless overwritten manually. And every one of those features had a backstory inside Revel's failure. But I wasn't done. The key wasn't just to build Threadline. It was to get it inside without anyone knowing I was behind it. So I reached out to StackFlow Integrations, a mid-sized software contracting firm I used to consult for, quietly. I offered Threadline as a white-labeled internal operations suite. They could license it, distribute it, and own support. I'd take a back-end equity share and a licensing fee per install. No name, no press, just contracts. StackFlow bid immediately. They were tired of vendor bloat. They liked that it was lean. It just worked. No noise. We polished the install, wrapped it in a non-branded shell, called it OpsTrace 1. 2 months later, Revel Dynamics issued an internal RFP for streamlined automation infrastructure following CoreOps deprecation. Their internal solution, Gavin's solution, was failing, quietly but undeniably. StackFlow responded. Their pitch? A fully managed operations platform already deployed in 3 mid-market firms. Proven. Quiet, cheap, Threadline. It wasn't just coming through the front door. It was being invited. The irony was exquisite. Gavin had stripped me out of the system in the name of progress. Now he would onboard my system, blind to its creator, under pressure from the same leadership who once told me I wasn't flexible enough. I watched the contract close from my dashboard. Ravel paid an annual fee equivalent to my last 4 years of salary, just to license what they used to call legacy logic. Only now, it came with better documentation and no resistance. The rollout was announced on a Monday. An all-hands video briefing, pre-recorded and slick. Gavin appeared in a blazer too tight for his shoulders, standing in front of a branded hex grid animation. The presentation was titled Next Ops, Velocity Through Simplicity. He introduced Ravel's new internal automation suite, replacing what he called legacy-sourced bottlenecks and manual fragility zones. The tool? Something cobbled together from Jenkins wrappers, third-party plugins, and 3 interns who didn't understand recursive loops. He ended the video with, "Let's build the future, one clean process at a time." It would have been funny if it weren't so predictable. I watched from my apartment, coffee in hand, Threadline already logged in. The first sign of collapse came on Wednesday. Automated data syncs failed to run for the Eastern Europe division. Manually triggered retries didn't push through. Why? Because Gavin's scripts had no fallback logic for regional time shifts, something my original scripts accounted for. They tried again Thursday. It triggered a circular loop that locked 10 dashboards. By Friday, sales reporting was off by 19%. Internally, panic set in. Slack channels were flooded. QA blamed DevOps. DevOps blamed legacy permissions. Gavin blamed non-standard inputs, which was code for, "I didn't validate it because I didn't know it existed." I watched it unfold through the most ironic of windows. Threadline's anomaly reports. Ravel was now licensing the system that warned me about their system. By week's end, Stackflow, now acting as the Threadline vendor, offered to help stabilize the transition by expanding Threadline coverage across departments. It was billed as an operational overlay, but it was really a takeover. They accepted. By the 3rd week, 78% of Gavin's framework had been shut off. Silently, without announcement, his processes were still visible, but they weren't active. They were placeholders now, like knobs on a child's toy. Gavin didn't know. He was still sending update emails, still posting GIFs, still linking to performance dashboards that were no longer pulling from his scripts. They were pulling from mine. And then came the final pivot. Ravel issued a staff-wide memo. As part of our evolving automation landscape, we're optimizing team structure to align with real-time systems performance. That was HR code for layoffs. They began with the junior ops team, 4 analysts Gavin had hired in his first month. 2 were good. 1 was excellent. None of them had written a line of code in weeks because Threadline had replaced their task queue by default. Next came Gavin. It wasn't public. Just a quiet LinkedIn update 2 weeks later. Excited to explore new opportunities in the automation and AI space, looking for what's next. He removed his title at Ravel. The CTO left a month after that. By then, Threadline had been licensed into 5 other firms, 3 of them competitors of Ravel Dynamics. Stackflow rebranded it slightly for each one, but the engine remained unchanged. Mine. And not once did my name appear. Not in the credits, not in the calls, not in the transition memos. Just a line in a Stackflow technical doc. Original logic sourced from proprietary performance frameworks optimized for resilience. I couldn't have written it better myself, because I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need to say a word. They collapsed quietly, exactly the way they erased me. The layoffs continued for 3 weeks. It didn't make the news. Ravel Dynamics was mid-market, too polished to attract scandal, too irrelevant to invite scrutiny. But inside the company, the power vacuum was obvious. After Gavin's quiet exit, the CTO announced his transition to advisory consulting. The same week, StackFlow was formally integrated into a new strategic partner role, with access to every system Gavin had once controlled. No press release, just a calendar notification with the subject line: Ops Trace Activation Phase 2. Threadline had taken over. I received the new contract details from StackFlow 2 days later. Ravel had increased their license tier, quadrupling the fee. The justification: Ops Trace has reduced operational failure tickets by 93% and eliminated time on call for 5 departments. They didn't know the system they were now fully dependent on had been architected by the man they labeled unfit to adapt. And I intended to keep it that way. Ravel's new CIO, a woman named Angela Cortez, reached out to StackFlow to request deeper technical advisory support from the original framework engineer. That request was forwarded to me. She didn't know who I was. Not really. But she had done enough due diligence to know Threadline wasn't built in a weekend. She wanted insight, discreet, strategic. Not another Gavin. Someone who could ensure the system kept running as it scaled. I wrote back with conditions. No internal meetings, no title, no announcements. Technical authority only. Double the hourly rate for real-time escalations. Paid quarterly, 60 days in advance. They agreed. I reviewed my old infrastructure under a different name. No one questioned it. The same people who once labeled me inflexible now followed a system I had architected under a different flag. Ravel Dynamics restructured their workflow documentation, integrating Threadline logic as their best practice model. They included it in onboarding, cited it in investor decks, referred to it internally as Keystone Compliance Automation. They didn't know that every module inside Keystone was tagged in the back end with an author field that read dk.silent. Let them think it was outsourced. Let them praise the tool, not the builder. Legacy isn't a nameplate, it's control. Meanwhile, StackFlow expanded their rollout. 4 new firms, 1 international, 2 government adjacent. Each time I reviewed the code quietly, tuned the logic, polished what needed to be polished, never asked for credit. Angela sent one more request, a personal one. Would I consider coming in once, just for an informal strategy roundtable? I didn't decline outright. I just didn't respond, because showing up wasn't the point. Let them work in the house I built. Let them feel stable, empowered, transformed, as long as they never touch the foundation. I never went back, not to the building, not to the block, not even the side of town. My involvement with Ravel Dynamics ended where it began. Behind a screen, in code they didn't understand, inside systems they thought they had outgrown. I kept the contract with StackFlow, quarterly, clean. No calls, no lunches. They paid on time. Ravel's dependency deepened. Eventually, Threadline wasn't just a support layer. It became the operating spine of their business logic. User behavior, anomaly resolution, regional syncs, permission inheritance, all of it routed through my system. They no longer noticed the scaffolding. They just assumed the building was stable. That's how you know a structure is built right. The best automation isn't praised, it's invisible. 6 months after Gavin's departure, I received a package. No sender listed. Inside, a sealed envelope and a branded notebook from a leadership retreat I had never attended. The note was handwritten. I'm told you were the reason it still works. We never met, but I've spent the last 4 months trying to understand what you left behind. I still can't find all of it, but I know enough to say this. It wasn't legacy. It was architecture. Angela Cortez, Chief Information Officer, Ravel Dynamics. I placed the letter in the same folder as my last severance stub, not out of sentimentality, just record keeping. That night, I logged into Threadline's central dashboard. 5 companies, 8 deployments, 346 modules live. I toggled one into standby, just to watch the load balancing adjust. The system adapted in milliseconds, no alerts, no delay, no human needed. I closed the dashboard, opened a clean text file, typed a sentence I'd thought about for weeks. Modern doesn't mean younger, it means quieter. Then I deleted it. Not because it wasn't true, because it didn't need to be said. A week later, I gave a short guest lecture at a community college near my apartment. The class was called Foundations in Systems Thinking. 15 students, no microphones. I didn't mention Threadline. I didn't mention Ravel. I drew a simple flow chart on the board. Black marker, 5 nodes. One student asked me what the most underrated skill was in tech. I said, knowing when to let your work speak without you. They thought it was modesty. It wasn't. It was control. 2 months after that, Ravel Dynamics published a white paper on operational transformation. The final paragraph read, "True digital resilience is silent. It operates before failure. It adapts without instruction. It remembers what others forget." They were quoting Threadline. They didn't know it, but that was the point. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about being embedded so deep they forget what it replaced. I was never too old to adapt. I just adapted before they even noticed.